Welcome back to a really special episode of Tying That Guy. I'm Wes Chatham, and here's my good friend, sometimes lover, sometimes enemy, sometimes joustus, Ty Franck. Hey, Ty.
Yep. I mean, we're a well-written story because sometimes friends become enemies, sometimes enemies become friends. We laugh, we learn, we love.
Friends. Is joustus a word?
Joustus? I don't know. That's a good question. I thought you were talking about the Supreme Court, the joustus of the peace, because our guest rode here in the short bus, on the special bus, our former sometimes enemy, sometimes ally, the guy who controlled all the money and told us we couldn't have things, Manny Danelon, or as I called him, Danny Manlion. You could take your hand off the camera, Danny.
There we go. Hey. Thank you, guys.
When we were working together, I used to call you Danny Manlion.
You did. And you could hear me roar because all of the challenges that we had and trying to figure out all the widgets of it all. But yeah, I will wear that name with a red badge of courage. So thank you.
That's like a superhero name. Like he's half man, he's half lion, he fights crime.
Hey, Manny, I apologize. I got kicked off the screen. There was a time when Ty called in the forces of darkness through the Ouija board while we were doing the podcast, and it's never worked right since. The powers of Satan, and his mic will pop off, and Joseph's mic will pop off. So anyway, pay no attention to that.
I think it's
Sorry about that.
The Russian clan, the pop off. So I think it's that force, the dark force. That
oh man! Okay, so now I feel like Manny is here because we've got our first terrible pun of the day.
My God! That's so good.
Manny was famous on set when. Let me do a quick introduction. So Manny was the line producer for, was it 5 seasons of The Expanse? 4 seasons, right? Because the first 2 you were the production manager, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So Manny's been on the show for 6 seasons. The first 2 he was production manager. The last 4 he was the line producer, which is a very important job on a film set. The line producer is the guy who controls all of the money and tells you which things you could buy and which things you can't. And denies actors when they want to go home for the weekends. He'll say yes or no. Even though I got to be honest, he always let me go. So I'm thankful for that.
I did. I have a soft spot for you, Wes.
Manny kept it light on set. Manny always try to keep it light. Always try to keep like a positive, upbeat air. I think your job can easily turn into the no man, and that wouldn't be any fun. So you try to keep everybody positive and up. And one of the ways you did that is you were a constant source of terrible puns. Yes. All day long. Just terrible pun after terrible pun.
I am the king of bad dad jokes, and I know it, and I've embraced it. And I prefer to have people laughing at me than with me. So I'm good with that. All fair and game. But what I wanted to say is one of the challenges that we've always had on The Expanse is the appetite for what you wrote to the budget to the schedule was always challenging. and for me, it was always a way to find a balance between the creativity that you guys wrote and the wonderful words that you put on those pages. And how could we lift them and put a picture to it that would do the words justice? So that was always my mantra. And I don't know if you remember me saying that at production meetings. Anytime that we got together, I always said, I hope that we can honor your words with picture.
So first, I want to apologize for the level of fame that's about to be thrust upon you for being on Tying That Guy. There is 8s to 10s of people that listen to this. And I want to say, before we get going, describe specifically what it is that you do and what it is that you've done for The Expanse, what a line producer is.
I was the first one to be hired July the 7th, 2014, one day after my birthday on 2014, the first one in Toronto. And I was handed over a script. I read all the books, and they said to us, here is the amount of money that you have. Here is the timeline that you have to do it in. Go. And then it was about putting all the different crew members together to try to accomplish the appetite of the creative to finally get it in the can, so to speak. It's a term that was endearing to the filmmaking process, is to get the film in the can. We shot everything on digital, but is to get it in the can in the most voluptuous visual sense that we could to give the editors the creative ability to put such a massive environment together. And for me, it was about reading the first script, going out and buying the first 3 books and just absorbing as much of it as I could and trying to honor the words, as I said earlier, and the vision that Narain, Ty, you had, and giving the support to all the actors whenever they stayed in Toronto, that they didn't want to leave. So that was the goal. That was the impetus for my passion for The Expanse, building a foundational base that we could build and build and build all the different seasons. And also convincing Alcon the project was worthy of doing in the footprint that they've given us. And time after time, at the end of a season, I would have to convince them to keep the set standing, because to take it down and put it back up would cost more than to leave it up. And I think we gained, specifically at the end of season 3 and the beginning of season 4, a kudos to us for, various things. Having Amazon say they wanted to do it for the fans, having the cast wanting to come back, the creative that they accepted, the crew wanting to come back. There was about 85% of the crew coming back, and all the sets were still there, and it just became turnkey. So for me, it's been a phenomenal journey, and I look back on it and will use The Expanse as the show to always try to emulate in the future.
So you would say that you create and oversee the budget and the schedule, correct, and that's your job as the line producer, correct? So let's go back now and let's start. When did you decide that this is something that you wanted to do, and how did you get placed in the job that you're in now? Were you a fan of movies growing up?
All the time. I not only fans of movies, but I was hopefully trying to be an actor. And then I realized at a very young age that you had to be really good. Wes, I could never be you. And I think you could never be me as a line producer. So that's the separation.
God, no. God, no.
No, God, no. God, no, is right.
No way.
So at the end of the day, I realized that I was going to work behind the scenes. And then I went to Ryerson, which is now called Metropolitan University, and I took radio, television arts. And when I graduated for that, the first few shows that I did was Police Academy 3, and I got the bug, and I knew that this is where I wanted to be. So I became an AD, a location manager, a production manager, line producer. So that was my journey through this wonderful field. And every day that I wake up, I say to myself, I'm going to do the best that I can. And every evening I look in that mirror and I said, I have done the best that I can. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And that's a different story.
Was The Expanse the first show you went from production manager to line producer, or had you done that before?
No. Oh no, I'd been doing it for 14 years prior.
So why did you start on The Expanse as a production manager then? Did you just love us? You just wanted to work with us?
No, let's put it this way. The work that I was doing was line producing work,
yeah,
but someone in the team didn't want to share that credit. Mm. So I finally got to the end of season 2 where I said, if I am doing the work, give me the credit. If I'm not going to get the credit, then I'm not going to come back. So it was sort of a pivotal point for me after season 2, whether or not I was going to come back. And there was forces within the group that said, you know what, you should get the ability, you should be given the ability to do the work that you were doing and get the credit for it. So that was the pivotal point for me.
I think we can all admit it was a terrible idea for them to make me the line producer the first 2 seasons. That was a terrible idea. I had no idea what I was doing, so I'm glad they fired me.
You had no idea what you were doing, but you still wanted credit.
Yeah, I wanted the credit.
You still wouldn't share credit with poor Manny over there.
They were like,
slaving away.
Like, you're calling yourself the line producer. Do you even know what that is? I'm like, no, I have no idea. But I've decided I'm calling myself that.
You were drawing all these lines everywhere, but they were lines in the script and not what I do as a line producer. But yeah, I think the writing was on the wall. I'm thankful that I had the ability and given the opportunity to prove that I could step in to fill shoes that I was already filling in. I don't know how else better to say it.
You talked about it in broad strokes, but to be as specific as possible, walk us through an episode of The Expanse, sure, what your job is in particular, and how do you start off, and then how does that go forward?
So what we do is at the very beginning of the season, prior to even us filming, we have budgets. And so what you do is you do an amort budget that talks about all the expenses before the episodes and after the episodes.
And that budget is coming to you from Alcon, right? Our studio. They're saying, here's how much money you can spend.
Exactly. So it's how much money can we spend? Yep. And then I go in and I break everything down. I calculate how many grips, electrics,
right,
how much it's going to be for construction, how much we have to set aside for visual effects. It's something that over the years, you build a sense for it. And so they gave me a budget that was a sci-fi show done in Vancouver. And I said, this is no reality check here in Toronto. So I took the budget and went at it and broke it down to the components that I thought it would be based on the scripts that I read. The ADs do a breakdown, and they break it down into 8, 10, 11, 12 days. It has how many cast is in, your cast deals go in, your writer deals go in, the producer fees go in, and all of that becomes part of the budget. We lock it. So what changes is episode to episode. So then I do an episodic budget when we have that episode. And that episode is either going to be over or under budget. And it was consistently over budget because the appetite for the script was much greater than the money we had. And so whenever we put out a budget, it would always be over. And then we would have to go along and try to find savings. And that's when I came in, and we sort of, throughout the 6 seasons, we would negotiate with the directors. If you want 150 extras, if you bring it down to 125, then I can get you 2 crane days. If you want this specific cast member who's coming out of the US, then we have to pay business flight. We have to put them up per diem. We can afford a Canadian that is just as equivalent, but then the name branding for that American versus the Canadian. So there's a difference there, and we have to make a creative difference. And that's when, Andrew and Broderick would come in and say, no, we want to go with the name versus the known name.
Manny was always arguing we should recast Amos with a Canadian guy. Always.
I thought it was more Icelandic.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do cast salaries come out, like the writer salaries, cast salaries, do they come out of the budget?
Yeah.
They do.
Like the episode budget?
They're in episodically.
I always thought that was separate.
No, it's baked into the episode.
So the more the actor wants, the less goes on screen?
Yes. Think about that. Think about that, Wes. Every time you wanted more money, you were stealing from our show.
Right.
Either that or it's
I'm in the middle of negotiations right now. I'm going to take that in mind.
It is a challenge of trying to figure out how to find a balance to be able to move forward, because the first episode or 2 traditionally go over budget. The last couple of episodes, you want to save some funds because those are the ones that are going to get people interested in a subsequent season. And somewhere in the middle, you have to find a balance to be able to pay for either end. And so that was another way of being able to structure the budget. And you know as well as I do, the VisFX is a character on its own in The Expanse, and there was a lot of money spent on VisFX. And traditionally, we're always over. And what Noreen always said, guys, I know we're over, but give me the opportunity to review the budget, give me the opportunity to review the cuts, and then we'll make the correct decisions. Inevitably, we would always find a balance to either bring it in on budget, but the first couple of seasons, certainly the VisFX did go consistently over budget.
I would say in the first couple of seasons that the visual effects were consistently budgeted incorrectly. I think they didn't understand the show they were making at the first couple of seasons. By the end of season 2 and the beginning of season 3, I think everybody understood, and the budgeting got much better. And the other thing that happened is they started to trust Narain that he was going to make some decisions in editorial that would fix those problems. So, they'd say, well, this is way, way over budget on the page. And he'd say, don't worry about it, guys. Let me get it to editorial. I will find the places where those scenes don't need to be in the show at that point, and that's how we'll bring it down. And I think people started to trust that he was doing that by about into season 2, beginning of season 3.
I agree, because what was happening is we were making choices that a story needed to be told, and it was a massive story, and the universe that we were building was massive. So Narain had to pick and choose those beats that told the story, and then he would find the compromises within that episode or within other episodes. So there were other episodes that went massively over and some that came in under that paid and found the balance throughout. And that's how we were able to do it, believe it or not.
I mean, we're talking about visual effects right now, and they were always, that was always a problem. I went to every visual effects meeting, those page turns every time, and every time poor Krista would be sitting over there going, we budgeted it for this. It is 47,000% more than that. We got to figure out a way to get it down. I remember how much of a hassle that was, but I remember the biggest hassle you had, Manny. The hardest part of your job, from my perspective, was when we needed an actor for a certain stretch of the show that was working on another show, and the incredible links you would have to go through to schedule getting an actor from another show for a set period on our show. And like sometimes heroic links that you had to go to get people in.
Do you remember a specific one? Because I can tell you one that would raise.
Oh no, there was multiples of them. Go ahead and tell the story that you want to tell, though.
Well, there was an actor who was on Jessica Jones, and I don't know if you remember.
I do remember that.
And his name is?
Well, that was Terry.
Terry Chen was on Jessica Jones, and in his contract, because he was a series regular there, he was only allowed to do a competing show for one episode. We needed him for 6.
Yep.
So our legal counsel at Alcon went to try to negotiate with Marvel Comics because Narain knew the head of Marvel TV. And they said, let's let the guys work it out. So Alcon tried, it fell apart, and I asked them, do you mind if I take it over? He said, go ahead, fill your boots. So I got Marvel Legal involved. They sent over a one-sided contract that was, if we signed it, we could owe them millions, but we signed it. I then was told to go and phone the second in charge at Marvel, who said, I would not take this deal, Manny, because you're going to be selling your soul to the devil. And even if Terry Chen is on the plane in New York, I can pull him off and he won't be up. Here is the magic of Manny. I was not aware that the line producer on Jessica Jones was a fan of maple syrup. And if you remember, Kevin Jewison, one of our camera operators, NDP, his father is Norman Jewison. And they have a maple farm up in Caledon. So I sent a can of maple syrup to this line producer. He phoned me and said, hey, how did you know I was a fan of maple syrup? I said, I didn't. And he looked at the can and he said, look at that. I said, turn it around. He said, Norman Jewison Farm. And he said, is this really from Norman Jewison's farm? I said, it is. And so that allowed a relationship whereby, because we were block shooting 2 episodes at a time, I could send Terry's dates to him, and he would help us so that Terry could come in, we would bunch up his scenes, and we would shoot them out and send them back. It was one of the most trying things that I ever had to do for The Expanse, and loved every minute of it because I believed that story needed to be told with Terry Chen. We'll talk about who we had to replace later that we could. But anyways, so we made it work. I phoned the line producer of Jessica Jones. I said, thank you very much for making it work. I phoned the legal counsel at Marvel, and I said, thank you for making it work. And she said to me, Manny, nobody ever calls us back and says thank you. I thank you for thanking us. I said, no, I couldn't have done it without you, even though it was a one-sided relationship, and the contract was just all one-sided. And then I phoned up the second in command over at Marvel, and I said to him, Jim, I have to ask you a favor. And he said, you want to ask me a favor? I said, yes. Can I have my soul back? Because we made it work. And he gave me my soul back. He emailed it back. So there you go. But
he just borrowed it.
Yeah, he borrowed it, and I paid dearly for it. But no, we made it work, and it was phenomenal. One of the ones that we couldn't get back was Ava Sorella's first husband, and I'm sorry that we didn't and we couldn't, but because... Anyways, that's another story for another time and another.
Well, and that, I mean, since you've brought it up, that's a thing we get asked a lot is why did we recast Arjun in the later seasons? Yeah. And that's what I always say is like, if you don't have an actor under contract that requires that they do the show, then they can take other work. They can wind up on something else. And unfortunately, Brian, who we loved, would have loved to have had back. You know, he was on another show and he was recurring cast on, I think, a sitcom or something over on NBC.
He was a series,
So
series regular on NBC, and they said no.
Yeah, at that point, what can you do? I mean, you definitely, one of the things that I always appreciated about Narain, and I think you're the same way, Manny, is you never try to get between people and the work that's going to feed them. You never try to stop somebody from doing the job that makes them their living. So, you know, he would always, in any of the contracts, whenever we would talk to Alcon, Narain was always like, you know, because the writers, they always try to lock writers down for an entire year. And Narain's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to lock a writer down for a year. Once the show isn't being written anymore, they can go write something else. That's fine. They should. They need to make a living, right? And he was the same way with act. Everybody was just thrilled with Brian that he got a show and he was making good money over there. We were sad that we couldn't get him back, but we definitely were going to try to fight him on it.
And again, because of the budget threshold, which is shocking to a lot of people when you are able to put it into context, that Star Trek Discovery had double the budget that we did. But when you can't put an actor on a series regular contract, that you're paying more upfront to be able to use them further along, and we never knew, what the next season entailed. Yeah. So I think Arjun, unfortunately, was one of the victims of that circumstance.
And Wes was always demanding that we double his salary every year, so we had to fire a lot of people.
Manny, did it ever come to you with the Christopher Nolan thing that I had? The offer?
What season was that? Because I remember there was some scuttlebutt about whether or not you were coming back or not, and then
I think it was 5. I think it was. Yeah. I think it was 5.
It was beginning of season 5 because Wes, you and I talked about it.
It's just one of those, people listening, whatever. It's just one of those, heartbreaking situations where, something may come along, and it's just impossible. So what Manny did with Terry and them, it's that's the impossible that he pulled off, and sometimes it is just impossible where you're just not going to be able to pull it off. Because I think I would have missed probably a month of shooting, and then we would have to find a way to catch up or wherever, and it was too much at the time. But it's one of those questions that are faced. I didn't know if it got to you at that point, but I know that it was it was we were talking with Alcon and we were talking with Narain and all of those situations, and Narain, bless his heart, was like, we will figure out a way to figure this out. Alcon was not, they were not, they understood the challenges that would come, with what was up against. So I'm actually glad that you didn't get that call that, hey, Wes is not going to be here for the first month.
I actually remember this now, and I did say to them, tongue in cheek, but I was very, very honest about it. I said, if you want me to step in and do the West parts, I will. So I was not that frightened.
Exactly. So you were there for me. You were going to do that for
me.
I
was there.
I was just really excited at the idea we could finally recast that part.
You could have finally cast the actor that you've always wanted to play, Amos.
It was very exciting for me.
Yeah, there we go. With an Italian stallion. If you recall, we also had a pregnancy by one of our actors, Kara G. And here's a question for the two of you. Insurance will only insure one of the trimesters of a pregnancy. Is it the first one, the second one, or the third one? Ty, which one do you think it is?
Third. I would guess third.
Third?
Yeah.
Wes, which one do you think
I would guess
first?
Third. I would say third by the way you asked the question.
Okay. So it is the second one.
Really?
And the reason it's the second one and the only one that they will insure is because the first one, there's the possibility of losing the child or being bedridden. And the third one is the child may come early, also be bedridden. So the only one that they insure is the second one. So we had Kara G just before the Christmas break that we had to shoot her out because there was no insurance on her. Plus, we had to make sure that we got all our footage so that she could go down and have the child. So that was another challenge again. And I don't know if you remember, but you could almost see sometimes, and we would put certain set pieces in front of her or make her do certain things that would hide it. So that was another challenge that we had.
Oh, well, there's a couple of shots where Brett painted her stomach out. there's at least
you
one.
Do that too.
There's at least one that I remember.
I love hearing these stories. I love hearing because the reality is, people think line producer, they think numbers, accountant guy that keeps the trains running on time, everything. But there's a huge amount of creativity that goes along with your job. There's a lot of things that you got to figure out. You got to figure out how to think outside the box and send some maple syrup, how to bring somebody in during the second trimester. There's a lot of creativity that goes in your job. I think when a show like The Expanse, a lot of people see what goes on the screen, but there's a lot of creativity around it that makes that thing on the screen possible. Manny, I always wonder what the conversations are. So let's say that we're shooting. We went over a few nights. We went over a schedule a few nights in a row. And then it's on Friday night and it looks like we're going over again. And the director is still on, like he still has like 7 more setups and we're kind of spending a lot of time on the first setup.
Right.
And you show up on set. When you show up on set, because there are those moments where it's like, Manny's showing up on set. I'm always wondering, what are those conversations? Are you like, hey, motherfucker, we got to get this, we got to keep moving. Like, you just need to move on? Or like, is it just you showing up being like, there's a parent in the room, like, we need to get going? Or like, what are those conversations?
So in my head, I had the motherfucker word, right? But it's not me. So, you kill him with kindness.
Right.
So we always look at, okay,
right.
So we're not coming back. We got to get her done. How can we do it in such a manner that we're not going to, because don't forget, I remind the director that we're in a field. It's
that you were an
night,
AD.
But in a field at night, and it's going to take the crew 2 hours to wrap out of here. So the longer you go, the longer they're going to go.
Yeah.
And that's going to chew into the amount of money that you've got and the amount of extras that you want. You know that crane that we talked about? Well, I may have to pull that back because we're talking thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars of overtime when you get to that point. And I think we've been blessed with the directors that we had in the past, that they understood the value of that and they would do their homework. And if you recall, Breck, who first started with us in season 2, was a wild man. And then we were able to help him help us. And then he became one of those directors that came back time after time after time.
So let me ask you a question. I've always wondered this. I've worked on shows where the director of the pilot, sometimes he's a name director, or he's coming in, he's directing the pilot, and he's not responsible for the rest of the episodes. So he comes in and he knows that he can suck the budget out of all the episodes to his show, and the more that he goes over, it doesn't matter because another show will take the hit, another episode will take a hit. How do you handle those guys that come in and they're like, look, I'm just doing the pilot and I want the pilot to be as best as possible, and some other director's gonna have to suffer because I'm taking their money to do these crazy things?
A pilot director has been hired for a specific function, a specific job. And so there is a certain amount of latitude because that will get you many seasons and many episodes. So I'll park that idea and come back to it. My challenge has always been those other directors that go consistently over budget and they take away from the other directors that are coming in, and there's a compromise. So it's finding that balance, and sometimes it's not about the directors, but the creative words on that page and the episode, the way it's written. And Ty, you can attest to it because there's some episode that you wrote that were very expensive, and other ones that we needed to save money that you underwrote. And I don't want to say underwrote to diminish it, but you wrote it so that you could fit into the budget. So when a pilot director goes over, yeah, it's pain throughout the system, but whoever hired him, Studio Network, didn't know that director was going to do that. That's shame on them, because there's only so much we can do on the ground with that director to put him within that box. But we also know that putting her in that box ties the hands of what may happen in the future for the amount of episodes that we can do in that season or the amount of seasons that we get. Because traditionally, you can always, instead of delivering 10 episodes, deliver 9 if you've got that far over budget when the Studio Network has that agreement within it. We were lucky on The Expanse that we did 10, 13, 13, 10, 10, 10, 6. But that was all pre-discussed, and here's the budget that it needs to go to. And we had a lot of support from Andrew and Broderick to, give us the time that we needed, the budget that we had, and we tried to find that balance because there were, seasons where we didn't quite hit it. There's
a lot of places. This is something I learned over 6 seasons of doing the show. There's not just one place that can flex. It's not just on the director's head. It's also, on the writing side. There have been plenty of times where Narain would say, we need to rewrite this scene. We need to take these elements out. They're just going to be too expensive, or drop a scene entirely because it's costing more than it's actually adding to the show. So, there's a lot of that going on too. So it's everybody pitches in when you get to that point. And then on the editorial side, going into editing, like, here's this sequence. It'll be cool if we do it, but it's going to cost, 30% of our VFX budget for that episode, and we don't want to pay that much for it. And so you trim the scene down or drop it entirely. Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. It's not just on the directors. It's kind of on all of us.
That collaborative effort was fantastic on The Expanse. And I've been on other shows where the director dug his heels, the writers dug their heel, and there was just no compromise within the system. And we went over budget, and it was paid for by other episodes. And That's just sometimes the reality.
I've always wondered this. This is my question. I mean, if you have specific stories, you don't have to say any names, but those stories are always fun to hear. But I've been on projects and I've worked with actors that are consistently fucking late. And when I say late, I mean I'm like, how do they even finish this movie? Like they're like showing up at lunchtime, and then when they get to set, they'll have these endless conversations about motivation and they're this and they're that. And then they leave. They leave like before we were like finishing. So I always wonder, I'm like, does this time get just sacrificed from the budget and they got to make it up in other places? Or do they have to reach back out to the studio and say, hey, you pick this actor? Like, how do you solve those problems?
I've been thankful, and I count my lucky stars that I personally have had very few of those type of experiences. But when that happens, the first thing that you do is you notify the studio network and you say, kids, this is what's happening. It's beyond our control. This is how we try to mitigate it. I had a mother come to me on another show of an actress, and she said to me, padded by 20 to 40 minutes. So we would pad her times by 20 to 40 minutes. And so you build within those checks and balances in order to get through the day. But, there's an actor that was in town who would consistently show up late, would only do half a day work. And the only thing you can do there is just you continue add days, the budget goes up, but because he was such a name brand and made so much money on the specific shows that he worked on, that it was part of the formula. They just accepted it. And I've been thankful that I have not had to deal with those type of actors, probably because I didn't want to take those type of jobs. So here's one example. 2 weeks before going to camera, I got sent the script for Good Will Hunting. I read the script. And this was a TV movie with Cecily Tyson called Mrs. Scrooge. I read the script and I said, oh my God, this is fantastic. I've never been fired off a show. I've never left a show. And I read the script and I went, oh, I've got now a dilemma. So when I started to do my homework on the Miramax company, I realized that there were some challenges with the folks that were within that company. So I made a conscious decision to turn the show down and I moved on. Later on, there's that Me Too movement and what happened with that company and the bad vibes that I was sensing. So those are just, decisions that we make that we have to live with. And I live with looking at the poster over at CineSpace because it was shot at CineSpace and say to myself, well, I think I made the right decision because I didn't take that show and for the good reason that I didn't leave a show to take this one. And to that, it's all about the folks that are involved in the production that make it a decision that one has to make, whether or not you want to take it. And I've been lucky enough in my career that I've read great projects and worked on great projects, and very rarely did I have to do a project because of a paycheck. I did it because of the creative behind it and all the challenges. There were shows that I could have taken that were very simple, and I didn't want to do that because for me, the more challenging, the more widgets that we had to find, the more puzzle pieces that we had to put together, those were the shows that I was attracted to, both as a location manager, an AD, and a line producer.
Yeah.
And The Expanse was certainly a challenging show.
Think of the going to Illis, doing the work in Illis, and trying to find that perfect place that we filmed in, that we did the drone shots over and had all that fantastic looking water that made it otherworldly, that we were able to just take a few of the trees in the background to give it that, again, that Illis feel. Going and building Tyco Station over at Enercare Center because they were no longer having conventions during COVID that gave us, that 70,000 square feet of clear span space to be able to build all those sets. Like these are all the things that, working through COVID, putting you guys into 14 days of quarantine for one day reshooting. For me, that becomes, the master of planning, having a team come together that looks at everything. I used to have a sign above my desk. There are no problems. There are challenges, and to each challenge we'll find the solution. For me, that was a telltale sign of what we did on The Expanse.
Yeah, I just got mad every time I would put something in a script and you would tell me I couldn't have it. I would just always get mad. I'd be like, how dare you tell me I can't have the toys that I want? But but
Okay, let's throw an example. Come on, let's take off the gloves.
What I was about to say, my
get.
follow-up to that was, in every case, we found a solution that still got me the thing.
Thank you.
Even if not the exact thing, then at least the conceptual thing that I wanted. So it was never just a matter of you can't have anything. It was like, okay, you can't have that super expensive toy, but you can have this other toy that's almost as good, costs half as much, and will let us do the other things we need to do. It was always it was never just a no. It was like a no, but we could do this other thing. Yeah.
Well, one example is he originally wanted Nick Nolte for Amos Burton, but you said he couldn't afford him, so he had to get the poor man's Nick Nolte.
I love that you think you're the poor man's Nick Nolte. Come on.
Hey, Ty, I think we did better than Nick Nolte, but don't tell Wes. Don't tell Wes.
No, the poor man's Nick Nolte is later career Nick Nolte.
The poor man's Nick Nolte is Nick Nolte. So tell us about your son and his new game.
So Christopher Danelon, who was our VR builder, he took all our sets before we even built them, and he put them in a VR world. So what happened is the art department would create the sets. He would have it imported into his system. He was able to then create a 3D model that he could manipulate. And you could go in with VR glasses, and he would give you the lenses of the cameras that we were shooting, the Cooke S5s, and people could see the producer, you, Ty, Narain, myself, the directors. We could all see the sets before a piece of nail hit a piece of wood. We would always have the ability to see it in a 3D environment, and we could always say, this work didn't work. Can we reduce this? Can we get rid of that? And so Chris, since 2017, has been working on a game that he is going to be launching this November the 24th. And I asked whether or not I could plug, because you know what? We do that. And I'm thankful that we can. It's called the Indigo Parallel, and it's going to be on Steam. And he's been working on it since 2017. And this November the 24th, he is launching it. And he sent both of you guys the link. So if you guys want to play with it, you can certainly do so. And it is quite a journey. He's got some great reviews from some great folks that play out there. And he's been at it day and night for, close to 5 years plus, going on to 6 years.
That's really cool.
It's called the Indigo Parallel, this November the 24th.
Good for him. He's a bright kid. He's a good kid, and he's been working on it for 5 years, so he deserves this to be successful. And
he must take after his mother.
Yeah,
he does. She's a rock star, and she keeps telling me, Manny, you got to get some new material because I am done with your puns.
Well, on the VR though, I mean, since you brought that up, that was a really powerful tool that we had, because we had the VR department and Chris and the other guys who worked in that department. I remember the person who most made use of that was Jeremy, our cinematographer, because he could go in and he could light the sets before they were built. Mm-hmm. He could figure out the lighting scheme for every set before like you said, before a single nail had been driven. He already had a lighting scheme figured out. And that was such a huge time saver for us. I mean, I think a thing that probably a lot of people don't know about our sets is that Jeremy always tried to use as much in-set lighting as possible. The sets felt like real places that were lit by the things that actually were in the set. And so building in lighting that made sense, like you would actually have that lighting in the real world, building that kind of lighting in was a huge part of that. And being able to go in VR, find all the places where he could hide lights or where he could put lights in that made sense. It was a huge time saver for him. He loved that VR thing. He was always in there.
Oh, it was amazing. And the beauty of what we did there is, because we were doing all this LED strip lighting, the strategic placement of those lights meant that we could shoot in a set 360 degrees and not have to worry about bringing in lights or the time to do so. There were times where we had to pull out a wall so we could get specific lighting in. But the ability to be able to light it in camera in the set just benefited the show, and the realism with we accomplished it. And I got to tell you that the set tours that I would do, whether it was politicians or some of the folks that were suppliers and all that pre-COVID, whenever they would go into our sets, they were mesmerized by what we produced on the show. We had some great set design, and we had some great journeys on the 6 seasons that we were at it. And I am thankful that we were able to go up to the moon. I'm thankful that we were able to visit Mars. I'm just thankful for all the belter and how everything went. When you saw a set, you knew where you were by the fact that the way it was lit, the way it was dressed, and the way it was built. That's the Expanse, the world of the Expanse. What a world it is.
Manny, we are so appreciative of you doing this, and it's good to see you again, buddy. And we miss you. And this, it's I'm glad we got 6 seasons out of a show that was so great, and it was such a we talk. I mean, obviously we're doing this podcast. We're all doing other things, but that was a special moment for us, and that was a great experience.
Mostly, what I liked about Manny was I liked his wife feeding me. Yeah. For the people listening,
the guacamole.
Manny's wife would occasionally bring food to the set. Most people don't know this about me, but my mother is Mexican, so I grew up eating Mexican food. That was like the food of my childhood. And Manny's wife would cook Mexican food and bring it to the set, and it was always a treat. So, like, for all the challenges I had dealing with Manny, it would made it worth it that Manny's wife would show up and bring food. So it made everything worthwhile.
Manny, we love you, brother, but talk about a guy who outkicked his coverage.
Yep.
Susie is a rock star.
Beautiful wife, can cook,
just
sweet,
everything. So Susie Guacamole. So she would go out. I don't know any other producer wife that would do this. Go out and buy 50 avocados and make guacamole for the entire crew. And leave little bowls for all of you to share it in your motorhomes, in your offices. She's a rock star, and I'm forever thankful that she puts up with my really bad humor and the long hours. But, behind a great man, there's a phenomenal woman, and she is far and above that. So I'm very thankful and very appreciative, guys.
All right. Give us a Harrison Ford story before we go, okay?
So since we're segueing from Susie to Harrison Ford, where I met Susie was in Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo. After I met her, 24 hours later, I dropped on one knee and asked her to marry me. She said yes. And I said, what are you going to do with your ex-fiance and boyfriend of 6 years who happens to be your next-door neighbor in Mexico? She said, I had a one-way ticket from Mexico City to Ixtapa, and I came here to think about whether or not I'm going to marry him, and you're my answer. A year later, we were married on the beach. 10 years after that, having worked with Harrison Ford on K-19, The Widowmaker, I'm hearing all these rumblings that Harrison Ford is in Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo. So we bump into him. He's staying at Villa del Sol in Zihuatanejo, and that's where we're staying. We walk up to him. It's myself, Susie, and Christopher. And the security guard waves us off. No. And you hear Harrison go, Manny? I said, Harrison? So we sat down on the beach while he was having lunch with Kaliska, and we talked about how Susie and I met, and Kaliska turned to Harrison and said, you have to produce that film, Harrison. Here's my Harrison Ford. And I said, Harrison, I know you're too old to be me, but, maybe you can produce it. So, yeah, Harrison, working with him on K-19 was a phenomenal journey. I was terrified, but to watch him and Liam Neeson for the first time that they were together on the submarine, and you saw these two iconic actors sussing one another out. It was like two peacocks in motion. It was a phenomenal journey. I'm still smiling over that experience.
Was it similar to when you saw me and Steven on the set for the first time? Did you have the same butterflies?
I did, but you guys were younger, so I had a flashback to my youth.
Well, we love you, brother. Best of luck to your son. I hope everything goes well. It's probably going to be a phenom now that it's on Tying That Guy, this podcast.
Yeah,
so,
literally ones of people will have heard of it now.
Yeah, ones or twos of people.
Ones or twos.
What's the name of it again?
Yeah, the name of the game is called the Indigo Parallel.
Indigo Parallel on
it's
Steam
on
in the near future.
The Indigo on Steam, yes.
It's named after one of Ty's favorite bands. He's a huge Indigo Girls fan.
Yeah.
So that's going to be easy for you to remember, Ty. Thank you guys for hanging out. We appreciate it. Say goodbye, Ty.
Goodbye, Ty.